Hey, I'm Susanna. I am the VP of Marketing and Communications at Adventure Science Center, and we are filming another episode of Science Under the Surface today with Andy Harding, who is an artist here in Nashville. He is a lover of all things celestial, so we'll talk a little bit about science, math, and some interesting elements that go into art that you may not think of when you see a typical collection. So stay tuned. We're excited for you to learn more. So Andy, you want to kind of quickly introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about how you got into art?
Sure. My path was pretty unorthodox. I had been pretty academically minded all through high school and was really focused on the sciences. I thought I wanted to be a chemist or a chemical engineer. And then in college, I was studying chemistry but did some study abroad programs and took an elective art class my senior year, and I just really got fascinated with that process and with making objects.
I think probably some parents' nightmare is their kid taking the elective class and deciding to take a whole career, but congratulations, because you seem to make it work. So can you tell us a little bit about what the word Arrokoth means and what your intention was with that collection?
Sure. NASA decided to title this object, which is the furthest known object that's ever been visited by a spacecraft. They named that object Arrokoth, and I just really liked kind of phonetically how it sounded, but also the word means sky. A nice term to sort of describe what this whole body of work is about, which was kind of looking to the skies, and I was really inspired by the photographs and the data and the information that's coming from the work that they've been doing over the past 10, 20 years or whatever.
Do you have a moment that was kind of like the time that you really got interested in space and NASA and everything that goes along with that?
I think I definitely have to credit popular culture for that, because the sci-fi movies that came out in the 80s when I was a kid, particularly Star Wars, 2001, those kinds of movies just really had a big impact on me. And I think as a kid, it's just the idea of a rocket or spaceships, you're into that as a 10-year-old boy or whatever.
And I do think it's interesting when you think about your work, all of those shows and all of pop culture is an interpretation of someone's understanding of space or space travel. So in your process, obviously you've talked a little bit about physics and some studying in chemistry. When you're thinking through what the show is and how you're going to define these objects and tell that story, are you using different aspects of the scientific method, or is it really all just born of kind of a creative thought or what you want the viewer to see or perceive from the object itself?
Generally, I'm just having fun and making things in the studio, and then when I'm done, I start sifting through like what it all means. And I'm trying, and sometimes that does mean I'm doing research about a particular a space probe and what they'd found and what was learned from that discovery, or I'm researching a particular idea in quantum physics or in the relativity theory or that kind of thing. I don't go super deep with that because I'm not, even though I studied that in college, I'm not a trained chemist or physicist.
Physics is so easy though, right? Like everyone gets that.
Yeah, but I am inspired by those ideas, and I a lot of times I draw the titles for some of the shows I've had and the works that I've created. I'm definitely drawing on that terminology. I think it's a fun entry point to talk about the work and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think a lot of what Adventure Science Center does too is expose people to aspects of science that they probably wouldn't think through the lens of being in that kind of world. And I think what you do is so interesting because, the average person who's walking through an art gallery or looking at a show may not be an enthusiast of space or science or quantum physics or things like that. But when they see something interpreted the way that you've interpreted it, they're like, oh, maybe I am really into this. This is actually really cool. And it allows someone to see something from a different angle. And that's to so much of us, the thing that kind of sparks that interest is, I didn't think of it that way. Now I'm interested. And I think that's really interesting with what you do. There's a couple different ways that people can view, and I know, around us, we've got some physical sculptures in here, but part of the work was also still photography and then some motion graphics of, again, trying to help people understand and perceive what it would be like to encounter one of these objects in space. So I think you did a really interesting job of that. Can you talk us through a little bit about what that process looked like and what you were hoping to achieve with that?
I was making these sort of, ostensibly just wood carvings of asteroids or celestial bodies, and I really wanted to put them in the context of where I imagine that they came from. And so I created this series of photographs that are against a black sky, and one of the pieces was a video that I made using stop motion photography of one of the pieces just sort of spinning in space. And an artist friend of mine, Todd Green, helped me create a soundscape for that video. So that really articulated my imagination.
Yeah,
for
super
the work.
meditative too. It's very relaxing. And you were talking about the music and that, and I believe he used some actual recovered sounds from space. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the reasons too that I titled the pieces the way I did is all of these are named after actual objects. And so I wanted the viewers to be curious about what those, what does Arrokoth mean, or where did it come from, or what, Philae's descent or whatever, for them to sort of be curious. And just maybe a few of those people typed it in, to a search and actually learned about these actual missions and the actual objects that are out there in space that we have information on. And I was just excited about learning about those different objects, and I wanted the people who saw the show to share that energy and enthusiasm.
I think that's really interesting too. I think that's also, again, the thing that is so interesting about where kind of science hides under the surface of things. And I think that is the fun of so much of, just introducing just a little bit about what something is, and then allowing the other person to kind of chase down that information. So I would love to understand a little bit about the actual creation of these objects. We know that it's wood, but what does your process look like? Are you using saws? There's obviously a lot of engineering that goes into that, I would imagine, and mechanics of tools that no one should ever put in front of me personally, but it's worked out well for you. So what is that what does your workshop look like? What are the tools that you use in order to create some of these objects?
Yeah. My practice has kind of changed and evolved over the years. When I started out, like you mentioned, the little piece on the wall over there, that was, I'm just using really tiny sandpaper and maybe a bandsaw or whatever to make these little objects and put them together with wire. And fast forward, many years, and I'm kind of still doing the same thing, but it's just on a different scale and, with a little bit different techniques. The pieces in the show, the more recent show, I mainly did by, I would start with a chainsaw because that's how we're talking the larger pieces, and just sort of generally shaping the wood and getting it into the size and shape that I want it. And then I would go in with a grinder there's some new attachments that I use that are pretty effective at removing material. And so that's how I did the main basic shape. But then it comes down to in the very end, a lot of hand sanding, with sandpaper and a little bit of mechanical sanders and stuff like that, just to give it that smooth finish.
What is next for you? What's what are you working on now? What are you planning to do next? What's got you itching creatively?
I think I want to continue down this line a little bit. This is all kind of a new direction for me. Up until a year or so ago, I was doing more work that's suspended from the ceiling here, kind of these geometric pieces. And so I feel like I've kind of just scratched the surface with this type of work, and I want to continue to make that. And I really want to continue to experiment in other media as well, with the videos and incorporating light, like some of the pieces in the studio here. So that's kind of my intent.
I would love to see some of the tools that you use in your workshop space. So I'd love to go downstairs and check that out. Is that cool?
Yeah,
perfect.
Good.
So you were mentioning this, it all kind of gets started here. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Well, generally I do some work with a chainsaw, which I've already done with this piece. I end up with things like this, and then I slowly kind of get them into a form more like this. And that's when, once I'm done with the chainsaw work, then I start working with an angle grinder with a sanding attachment on it that takes away quite a bit of material.
So once you have this kind of piece sanded and sort of ready to go, then your next step is to take it into that larger table that we're going to head over to in just a second, and then start working on it from there.
This is a little bit further along, so I've done a little more grinding on it. It still needs a little bit more work, but then it, eventually it'll come kind of to here, and that's when I'll start sanding down the really rough edges with an orbital sander. But I learned last year, because of some of the more intricate small spaces I was trying to carve out, that I needed something smaller. So I got this little mini pneumatic sander, which connects to air and then spins like that. So the smaller diameter of this allows you to kind of get into those small areas and sand it smooth. But once I've done all of that, like this has been sanded a lot with both of these. And then, after the final stage is just hand sanding with sandpaper.
So where can people see your work right now? Are you in any galleries right now? Do you have a website? Where can people go to learn more about your art and see some of the pieces, and especially some of the visual content also?
Yeah. Well, I'm on Instagram. My website is andyhardingart.com, and I show with Tinny Contemporary here in Nashville. And I currently have a piece in Channel to Channel Gallery in Chattanooga. So
awesome. Well, thank you for chatting with us.
Yeah.